be seated, and thank you all very much, and welcome to the White House. Barbara and I are just thrilled to welcome all of you to welcome our distinguished guests. That includes everybody in the room to the White House for this third in our series of presidential lectures. On previous evenings here, we listened to two of our finest historians talk when they took us into the minds and hearts of Abraham Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt. Tonight, we look back further. We turn our thoughts back further into the country's history to a time when the American spirit, as we know it, was born. We turn to the man who symbolized the spirit of a pioneering nation, rough-hewn, feisty, frontiersman and war hero, Andrew Jackson. He, the son of an Irish linen weaver, was a 14-year-old soldier in the Revolutionary War when he became an orphan. He scrapped, he struggled, I'm not stealing your stuff, sir. He scrapped, I know I can't do it half as well. He scrapped and he struggled and he survived, and nearly half a century later, he became President of the United States. He established a whole set of first president born in a log cabin, first born west of the Alleghenies, and the first who was neither a Virginian nor an Adams. Andrew Jackson was the president of the people. Old Hickory was their hero. But as I think of the presidency, more important than that, he was one of them. He knew how to campaign. He came onto the steamboat decks and he greeted the crowds on the hustings, and once elected, he tried to throw his office open to the people. My two favorite stories, and then I will stop, come from the moments that began and ended his presidency. On his inauguration day in 1829, the streets were jammed with crowds. People piled into Washington from all across the land. And that day, at the moment he was sworn into the presidency, he bowed to what he called the majesty of the people. The crowd, thrilled, went absolutely wild. And that day, symbolically and practically, the presidential palace became the house of the people. It got a little out of hand. Thousands pushed into the White House, climbed onto chairs, broke furniture, started fires, and cheered on fights in every room. Things have changed, not too much, but some. I guess might well have been something in the water. The other story that I like took place 8 years later, Professor, the inaugural of his successor, Martin Van Buren, a man whose record plagued me till the day I was elected president. But as Old Hickory strode to the podium, the crowd went wild, and Thomas Hart Benton described the moment. For once the rising is eclipsed by the setting sun, with a cry such as power never commanded, nor man in power received. Our guide tonight to the spirit of this remarkable leader is the scholar and historical storyteller, Robert Remini. Professor Remini is a history professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He's won major awards for writing and teaching, and there is no question that he is our nation's foremost Jacksonian scholar. He's written many lively and illuminating books about Jackson, including the definitive 3-volume work, biography, whose 3rd volume won the American, now called the National Book Award for Nonfiction. Professor Remini is a scholar and a storyteller, and tonight he'll show off both those skills, I trust, as he describes the life and times of our 7th president. And I am just delighted, sir, to meet your family who are with you here tonight, to introduce you to our guests, and to thank you in advance for what I know will be a treat for all of us. Thank you, sir, for coming.
Mr. President, Mrs. Bush, First, I have to get rid of a few cards that I had here of stories to tell. But I think I ought to begin by thanking you for inviting me here to participate in this marvelous series that you have both conceived, and I appreciate that invitation. It seems to me, ladies and gentlemen, that it is most appropriate that we talk about Andrew Jackson in this room, because this was his room. This should be called the Jackson room. Before he changed it, before he breathed life into it, it was just an open space. There was nothing here. There were some chairs, no painting on the wall. No one had done anything about it. Mrs. Adams hung her wash in the hall, and when they had a large crowd, the overflow crowd would come here. This man made this room. He changed it. He changed the White House, inside and out. He changed Washington. And Mr. President, he changed the presidency too. He is a remarkable figure, the 7th President of the United States. 6 feet, 1 inch tall, standing always at military stiffness. Even his hair stands at attention. And it gave him 2 more inches. When he came into the White House, incidentally, this picture was painted by his good friend, a man who lived in the house with him in a room up there on the north side, Ralph Earl. He wasn't, I don't think, a terribly good painter. Most of the paintings are rather flat and primitive, but Jackson liked them. And I do think he catches the spirit of this man, the indomitable spirit of the man, the willpower. It was incredible. When this was taken, he had had a hemorrhage. He hemorrhaged regularly, and he did not leave his bedroom for the last 6 months of his presidency, except for 3 times. He had 2 bullets in his body when he became president. One was in his chest, close to his heart, and they never could remove it, of course. And that is what caused the periodic hemorrhaging. And when the hemorrhaging stopped, usually it would take several days, the doctors would then bleed him. Until, in one of the last letters he wrote, he said, "They've taken 70 ounces of blood. And for a man my age, I think that is a great deal." The other bullet was in his shoulder. That bullet was put there in a gunfight with the Benton boys. Thomas Hart Benton, the senator from Missouri, and his brother Jesse. I don't want to get into it, but the bullet was lodged in his shoulder, and he passed out because of the loss of blood at the time. But when he did, he turned to the doctor who was attending him, and he said, "You are not to remove my arm, you understand, or you are at peril." He was then summoned to the Creek War, and he had to go with his arm in a sling. And he wrote to his wife, Rachel, and said, "Pieces of bone keep coming out of it." And he sent it back to her as a souvenir. I don't know what's happened to those slivers. But the bullet began to work itself down into the lower part of his arm in 1833, and it gave him a great deal of trouble. And the family felt it and said, "You can see it, you can feel it. It would be so easy to remove it. We'll call a surgeon and they can take it out for you." And he said, "If I do that, Henry Clay will make political capital of it in some way." He did hate Henry Clay with a passion. It got so bad, however, that they decided to do it. And Dr. Harris from Philadelphia was summoned, and in his office, right over that chandelier, the Lincoln bedroom, which was his office and his cabinet office, and there was a water closet next to it. The doctor came, made the incision, no anesthesia, mind you, no anesthesia. And then he squeezed both sides of the wound, and the bullet fell on the floor. And they picked it up, and they said, "This bullet belongs to Senator Benton." And he has a right to it. And Benton said, because it had been 20 years, he insisted that by law, Jackson owned the bullet. And they figured the date, and they said, "It's only 19, it's your bullet." And he said, "Well, in view of the good care that the president has taken of the bullet, I'll waive the extra year." I don't know what happened but it's no wonder they called him Old Hickory. Hickory was the name given to him by his soldiers. And that was about as hard a substance as anybody knew. And they loved him. And so too did the American people. He had such a hold on them. They had such affection for him that he was the most popular man in the country. More popular than George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, name anyone you want, and combine them. They couldn't compare to the affection that this man had for the American people. They trusted him, and he them. And why? Because of the Battle of New Orleans. This country was a free nation. Our freedom had been won in the Revolution. Not that you would know it. It was as though England acted as though you didn't win it, you didn't fight and win battles to merit your freedom. We gave it to you. We were pressed into it because all of Europe had united against us in the League of the Armed Neutrality. And they treated us, as Jackson said, so contumaciously, as though your freedom is going to be snatched away from you at the first opportunity. How we needed to have some great victory. And people said, "What about Yorktown?" Yorktown's not a victory. Yorktown's a surrender. Or Saratoga. Name one great battle. And there was none. And so the British impressed our seamen, as you know, seized our ships. Even the French, our allies, did it. We almost had a war with France, the so-called quasi-war with France, in the administration of John Adams. And it was so important for the American people to say to the world, we are free, we are independent, we are going to maintain it. We have a republic that's different from yours. We know you hate us, because if our experiment in freedom really works, the days of the crowned heads of Europe are numbered. We needed to go to war with Great Britain to reassure ourselves that it wasn't a fluke. And we went into that disastrous war of 1812. It was a mistake from the beginning. And the British blockaded our coast, invaded the capital, burned this building and the capital, and you can see the scars. Still, they should be preserved. Dolly Madison took that picture and the silverware. I give her a lot of credit for knowing what's important. And they fled. And then they were going to invade from the south in the Gulf of Mexico. And there was Old Hickory waiting for them behind a canal and the British came forward in full regalia. And here was a collection of Tennessee, Kentucky militiamen, a colored battalion, pirates, Indians, you name, there they were. And the British came forward, and the wave after wave of them fell as the Americans fired. And the soldiers coming behind them fell on top of them until when it was all over and they never reached the ditch, Jackson said it looked like the day of the resurrection, because the bodies on the lower level that were still alive started to get up, climb up, their arms stretched up into the air. And Jackson said it looked like people coming out of the ground. 2,000 British soldiers killed, wounded, captured, including the high command, and only 12 Americans. From that, people couldn't believe it. That was the victory that proved to the American people, we can beat the British. And they had just forced Napoleon's abdication and exile. It's before Waterloo. Even the Iron Duke Wellington said, I would like to have fought the Americans. It would have been an honor. Never again did the American people really feel that they had to prove to themselves or anybody else that they were free, they were independent, they were sovereign, and they were to be respected, or else. And they owed it all to this man. And they never forgot it. Even when he was dead, they were voting for him. In the crisis of 1860-61, in Lincoln's election, the nation is headed for secession and civil war. People went to the polls as though to summon this man back. Do your duty, we know that you would, and save your nation. I think if you have any sense of what the Persian War has done for the American people recently, Mr. President, you will have a good idea of how the American people adored this man. Nothing too good for him, including the presidency. Oh my God, they said, what credentials does he have? He kills Indians, the British, the Spanish, nothing else. Said one man, if Andrew Jackson can be president, anybody can. And I guess that's what his life is about, the democratization of this country. And despite all, he defeated John Quincy Adams. He later said that Adams belonged in a mental hospital. Adams said he couldn't spell his own name. He could. It was other people's names he had trouble with. On a single page, that one name or one word can be spelled 3 or 4 different ways. But there is really power in the language. And so they made him the President of the United States. And as President Bush has pointed out, after the ceremony, he got on his horse and rode back to this palace, as Associate Justice Story called it, and they mobbed the place. And poor Jackson was caught in the circular room. That's what they called it, the circular room. It's the blue room. And he was pinned against the wall. He couldn't breathe. Everybody wanted to shake this man's hand, to touch him. And finally they said, we have got to get him back to safety. And they had him climb through the window, and they took him back to his hotel. And they made a mess of this house. This barren, empty space had 3 tables with food and lemonade and orange punch laced with whiskey. And they fought over it. They stood on the chairs, on the sofas, and Senator Hamilton said, here was this black woman sitting majestically on a sofa with a jelly in her hand and a gold spoon as she sat watching the mayhem going on and enjoying this delicious repast. Mrs. Margaret Smith, the wife of the senator from Maryland, wrote, "It was the people's day, and the people's president, and the people shall rule. But God grant that one day or another the people do not pull down all rule and rulers. There were the most vulgar and gross in the nation pouring through the president's palace. I never saw such a crowd. The reign of King Mob seemed triumphant." And there he was. Took him 10 days to finally move back in. So they could clean out the mess. And he wanted, and the Public Buildings Commission wanted, a great triumphant house and city for him. And they went to him and they said, what would you like? What do you want done? Now, this is the period of Greek revival, and Jackson had a passion for columns, enormous Greek columns. And he wanted a portico with columns put on the north side of the building. You can't believe how uninteresting and really architecturally nothing this house was before that great north portico was put up. Jackson actually spoke with the committee, and they agreed that starting in March 1829, they would erect on the outside of the house this new portico. And it was finished by September. And they stored milk. It was nice and cool underneath the, I understand there are refrigerators down there now, which is, it seems appropriate. Turning to the rest of the outside, he put a new fence up on the north side. He widened the entrance. His carriage could not get through. Carriage, by the way, later on, was made from old Ironsides, the timber. It was a gift of the citizens of New York. And he introduced ornamental shrubs. The magnolia trees that you find on the grounds are supposedly planted there by him in memory of his wife, Rachel, who tragically died a month after he was elected. There had been much scandal connected with their marriage, as you know. When he went out to Tennessee, he fell in love with Rachel Donaldson, and he married her. Unfortunately, she was already married to another man. That is no way to get yourself elected President of the United States, I can assure you, at least not in the 19th century. And he, of course, blamed those scoundrels, those villains who had assaulted her. She died of a heart attack. And Henry Clay was the worst. He was the basest, meanest scoundrel that ever defiled the image of his God. Henry Clay didn't much care for Andrew Jackson either. And between Henry Clay and Daniel Webster and John C. Calhoun, the great triumvirate in the Senate, they took to cutting up Andrew Jackson in the Congress rather regularly. But presidents have that problem with Congress every so often. Supposedly, when Jackson was dying, somebody came to him and said, Mr. President General, is there anything you have left undone? And he thought a moment and he said, yes, there are two things. I didn't shoot Henry Clay, and I didn't hang John C. Calhoun. The columns became such an obsession with him that when the Treasury building burned in 1833, somebody had the horrible idea of putting the new one on the south lawn of the White House. And not only that, making it so big that they would put the State Department, the Treasury, the War, Navy, and the Office of the Attorney General. Can you see a collection of bureaucrats in one building such as that? Jackson vetoed it. And they came up with the next idea, which was Lafayette Square. He vetoed that. And they said, well, where will we put it? And you all know the story. He walked out to 15th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue with his cane, stuck it in the ground and said, put the damn thing there. And put columns on it. Go and take a look at that pile. Doesn't it belong in Imperial Rome? And this was to commemorate Jacksonian democracy. But Andrew Jackson, I think if you go around Washington and you see a building that's an old building with columns on, it was put up in the Jacksonian period. Everybody said, look what he's done to Pennsylvania Avenue. He's ruined the access from the Capitol to the White House. Actually, that is not so. The axis had already been ruined by George Washington. He pulled the house off the axis when it was being designed for reasons I'm not quite sure. Maybe he didn't want to look at the Congress. But actually what Jackson did was to provide a triumphant terminus to that great street. And for the first time, they macadamized it. It was just a muddy road beforehand. The other interesting thing that he did is he brought running water to the White House. They had never had running water before. There were two wells in the breezeways of the two wings to the house, and there were cisterns in the attic where the water was stored, and there were two water closets where the water could be gotten. One was right there in that corner next to the president's office. What they finally did was to acquire Franklin Park. It's on, I believe, 14th and K Street. And they got the water there, and through a series of pumps and metal pipes and reservoirs and fountains, they brought the water into the White House for at least three different places: the kitchen, the pantry, and the basement, we think. And they tried to purify it. No iodine. And that was important because cholera was a real problem. And for the president to have clear water, it was quite extraordinary. He was told, you'll be more comfortable with running water. We just hope the man is at the pump when you want the water. You'd go down, there was a tap, and you would turn it on. They finally then built a bathing room. And they had copper burners to heat the water. And so they were able to bathe in comfort, thanks to this man. He had an orangerie. Well, not that that's what he called it. He called it a hothouse for plants that were outside. I should mention, before we start to talk about his changes in the inside of the house, that because his wife was dead, he brought with him his ward and nephew and secretary, Andrew Jackson Donaldson, and his wife, Emily Donaldson. And she served as First Lady. She was a young woman in her 30s, but she was used to running a large household. She said she was going to try to make the household, this house, a model for American women. And she had 4 babies in the White House. And she was quite good. She did not actually run it. The running was turned over to Antoine Juista and his wife. And we have an account of the household staff of who was really taking care of what. And the staff included a house steward and a housekeeper, and that was Mr. and Mrs. Jewester, a butler and an under-butler, a doorkeeper. The doorkeeper was one of his slaves, a man by the name of Patrick, who would always warn people when they were coming in whether it was a good idea to see him. He would say, "I don't think you want to go up." And they'd say, "No? Do you like to put your finger in the flame of a candle?" he said. Do not go up. There was an odd man, a cook, an assistant cook, 2 sculleries, a housemaid, a staff maid, 2 laundry maids, 2 messengers, a valet, a coachman. No, it wouldn't. This was right under the state dining room, and it is now the map room. And there were shelves for wine and hard liquor, ale and beer. And you should see how much liquor they consumed in the Jackson White House. I'm sure that is no longer true, but on January the 13th, this might interest you, 1834, he purchased 20 baskets of champagne, 1 barrel of gin. He rather liked gin. Very discriminating man, I might comment. 1 barrel of brandy, 2 hogsheads of claret, 1/2 pipe of sherry. In April, he then bought a 1/2 barrel of ale, a 12 baskets of London porter, and a 12 baskets of old port wine. In May, he purchased 5.5 barrels of ale, 3 dozen baskets of London porter. You wonder who is drinking it, and 2 gallons of whiskey. I've heard a story that he was drunk for 3 days following his inauguration. That is a gross lie. It is not true. He wasn't really a drunkard. He drank a regular amount, but frequently went on the wagon. During the congressional sessions, he would purchase bottles of Chateau Margaux and Chateau Lafite. And when he went on vacation at the Rip Raps, he took gin, whiskey, brandy, Madeira wine, pale sherry, and champagne. But he was not averse to signing a temperance statement with James Madison and John Quincy Adams that said, being satisfied from observation and experience, as well as from medical testimony, that ardent spirit as a drink is not only needless, but hurtful, and that the entire disuse of it would tend to promote the health, the virtue, and the happiness of the community. We, therefore, hereby express our conviction that should the citizens of the United States, and especially all young men, and that's capitalized, discontinue entirely the use of it, they would not only promote their own personal benefit, but the good of the country and the world. But as I said at the opening, this was the room where they really wanted to show what Jacksonian democracy was all about. Now, in addition to his ward and his ward's wife, he brought an old friend by the name of William B. Lewis and the painter, Ralph Earl, and housed them on the 2nd floor. And he gave Lewis a job in the Treasury Department, doing not much of anything, but tending to the problems here in the house. And he turned over to him and assigned to him the task of making this a triumphant expression of the people. And the way they did it was quite extraordinary. It was regal. Jackson liked that touch of the regal. The entrance was an archway, and they had spokes of sunshine rays radiating around the entrance, and 24 stars on it, emblematic of the 24 states in the Union at that time. There were 24 when he became president. There were 26 when he left. He brought in Michigan and Arkansas. But this was empty. There were 4 fireplaces with wooden temporary mantles. And what they did then was to introduce decorated wooden beams and paneling throughout, and then put a lemon color French imported wallpaper that on the borders had blue cloth velvet. And on the windows, there was Grecian drapery, there was yellow curtains and blue, royal blue. On the cornices had a row of stars. You'll always find stars with them. And on top, eagles. Jackson liked eagles and stars and gilt and gold. They put on the ceiling 3 enormous sunbursts in plaster of Paris and hung huge chandeliers. The chandeliers each cost over $1,000. And each chandelier held 18 oil burners. They were later to be converted to gas. And then around the walls there were sconces of lamps holding 5 oil lamps. The floor was carpeted with a Belgian carpet, and tables were brought in that were richly decorated, wooden on the bottom, and Egyptian black marble on top. There is one outside the door. As you go out, you can see. The fireplaces were given black Egyptian marble. And they said when the lights were all turned on, that the sheen of the curtain, the black marble against the yellow wallpaper, and the many surfaces of gilt metal, and the explosions of sunbursts made it Jackson's own room. And it was here that he would receive the people in regular levees. And he would sit on a throne. Actually, it was a large chair, and the gentlemen and ladies would come forward and shake his hand, curtsy to him, and show their respect. They had a great many of these levees. And one of the most important changes, too, that he made was to use the state dining room. I don't believe any previous president had used the state dining room, which is at the West End. Actually, at the end of this corridor, there was a grand staircase, and that was where the staircase the family used to go up to their rooms. Jackson had 3 rooms on the southwest side: a sitting room, a dressing room, and a bedroom. And he used 2 rooms here, his office, and then an audience room that was right next door. He decided to use the state dining rooms for formal dinners, and he hired a very good Belgian chef by the name of Joseph Boulanger, who made excellent pastries. Jackson liked pastries. The dinner parties have been described by one visitor as something that was so sumptuous they couldn't get over it, and they jotted down each of the courses. The soup, the first course was a soup in the French style. The second course was beef boeuf. The third was wild turkey, boned and dressed with brains. The fourth course was fish. The fifth was cold chicken interladed with slices of tongue and garnished with dressing salad. The sixth, you wonder where they put all of this. The sixth was a canvasback duck and celery. The seventh was partridges with sweetbreads. The eighth, I'm not making this up. The eighth was pheasants, and the ninth was old Virginia ham. The 10th was the desserts, and they were jelly and small tarts in the Turkish style, blanche mode and kisses with dried fruits, preserves, ice cream, they loved to have ice cream, and oranges and grapes. And throughout, you wonder where this could have gone. The liquor that was served was sherry, port, Madeira, champagne, claret, and old sherry. That's quite a banquet. Normally, in the family and one or two guests, they would dine in the family dining room. They would meet in what they called, what is now the Red Room, but they called it the Washington Parlor because that picture of George Washington was hanging in it. And the president would be there to receive his guests, and then they would cross into the family room. He would invoke a blessing. They would sit down. There was a napkin beautifully folded on the plate and a slice of bread on top of that. And behind each person, each guest, a servant was standing, waiting for you to finish that plate. As soon as you did, it was whisked away and another plate was put in front of you. These dinners would start at 3 in the afternoon and end at 7. You'd need to get home in order to get over these lavish affairs. Jackson was given by this very generous Congress $50,000 to decorate this house, which was a great deal of money. And he used $10,000 on this room alone. You should have seen it, the pictures of it. It's all gone. They demolished it in 1850. More's the pity. I think it was even bigger. They thought I was mad this afternoon when I had come in to talk with the TV people, and I was going like so because it is supposed to be 40 feet wide and 80 feet long and 22. And I only counted 32 to the door. So they nicked off part of the Jackson East Room when they for these 3 chandeliers, they cost $1,800, and he had in the room 20 spittoons. Washington was horrified. Not the object, you understand, the number. All these Westerners coming. The spittoons cost 60 cents each. I thought that was extremely interesting. And you might be, Jackson, you will notice, had kept very good accounts, which served him in good stead. And he had an account of all the food that was eaten and bought. For example, 7 pounds of ham and 1 sheep's head cost $1.62.5. 23 pounds of flour cost $1.15. 68 cents for steak, milk, and eggs. They don't say how much. 68 cents. $1 for chickens and ducks. 50 cents for veal and chicken, 19 cents for fish, 12 cents for bread. But a bottle of ketchup cost $1, as did a gallon of whiskey. He kept pretty good records. The rest of the money was used to buy the equipment needed to run the house, and he purchased from the Russian minister. And you will see, I think, what's left of it in the entranceway. A silver service for 36 persons for $4,308.82. And Washington was aghast at the cost of it. But later it was decided that it was a very good buy. He also bought a 440-piece dinner set of French porcelain, and you can see it, for $1,500. He bought a 412-piece dessert set for $1,000. And he also bought the richest cut crystal, china, cut glass, silks, porcelains, silver, furniture. 24 chairs were reupholstered for this room, and 4 sofas. The man really knew how to live and liked to do it well, even though he was indeed the people's president. He loved the people. He truly did. All of his presidential messages ring with that sentiment of popular rule. The people, he said, are sovereign. The majority rules. And they knew it. He did not believe, for example, that anybody should be appointed to office. They should be elected and periodically come before the American people. That included Supreme Court judges, because he didn't believe the Supreme Court had the right to decide on the constitutionality of a question, and that's the end of it. He felt he had as much right to do it, and so did the Congress. Because, he said, to allow 4 men, because the Supreme Court consisted of 7, it would be 5 persons today. 4 men to decide what 15 million people can do under their constitutional form is not democracy. Call it what you will, it's not democracy. It's oligarchy. It's the rule by the elite, by the few. And I don't care how wise they supposedly are. The wisdom of the people is always so much better. And but prior to the Civil War, not even Henry Clay believed the Supreme Court had that final right. This is something that developed afterwards. I should like, as the final thrust, to show what this man did to the presidency. He really revolutionized it. He drove the great triumvirate mad with his ideas. In all the presidential terms, from Washington through Adams, through Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, and John Quincy Adams, the total number of vetoes, presidential vetoes, added up to 9. This man vetoed a total of 13 times. And he used the pocket veto for the first time. And all previous presidents believed that the only time a president may veto is if he thinks the bill is unconstitutional. He has no business vetoing for any other right. Jackson did not believe that. Jackson believed that if he thought it was not in the public interest, he had the right to veto. And his great bank veto, the veto that killed the second bank of the United States, cited constitutional reasons, but it cited other reasons as well. It meant, said Henry Clay in a powerful speech arguing against it, that he has begun an initiatory veto. He sits back and says, I'm going to veto any legislation you pass unless you come to me first and find out if I like it or not. And you don't have that right, Mr. President. We are the legislature. We initiate. You will, by your interpretation, become a partner in the legislative process. What it means, of course, is that he has become, as Daniel Webster, who also denounced it, he has become a two-thirds president because no presidential veto had ever been overturned. It was as difficult to overturn a presidential veto as it was to amend the Constitution. And it meant from there on in, the leaders of Congress had to come and learn the presidential will before they wrote their bill. That is a considerable amount of power. And another change that he made was one that also troubled the Congress. They felt that any man appointed to office requiring senatorial confirmation could not be removed without senatorial consent. What goes in with our approval goes out with our approval. And when previous presidents wanted to get rid of cabinet officers they didn't like, they arranged it so that they resigned. Not this man. He fired his Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of the Treasury doesn't even report by law to the President. He reports by law to the Congress then. I don't know what it is today. But Jackson said, every officer is under my authority. And Henry Clay then went to the Congress and said, we should impeach this man. But the House of Representatives are filled with Democrats. You know Democrats. And they're not going to move against this first Democratic, pardon the expression, Mr. President. So we in the Senate must initiate the proceedings, but we don't have that constitutional right. So what we'll do is we'll censure them. And they passed in the Senate, the only time in our history. They censured the President of the United States, and it really troubled him. So he wrote a protest in which he said, I am the representative of all the people, inferring, although he didn't say it, you are not. And I am their tribune, and I am responsible to them. It meant, what he was saying is, I am the head of this government. Somebody's got to be. I'm not your equal. I'm the first. And I've got a two-thirds head start. Oh, can you imagine how that killed Henry Clay and Daniel Webster and John C. Calhoun? They pulverized him in the Senate, but there was nothing. At the end of Jackson's term, one of the great things, Thomas Hart Benton, who was now his friend and who allowed the bullet to remain in Jackson, he got that censure repudiated and removed from the records. And of course, Calhoun said, the Constitution says the Senate shall keep a record. How can you keep a record if you're going to tear pages out of it? But that's what they did. That's what they did. And he went out in glory with the American people, as the President has said. I should mention one thing. As one of his great contributions, he paid the national debt. And he was determined to do it. He said that was his great objective. $60 million we owed. That was a lot of money. And he used that veto again and again to strike down legislation that he thought was improper. And of course, he put down nullification. He is the first president to state that this union is indivisible and it is perpetual. Once you enter it, you can never get out. Secession is not possible. Abraham Lincoln took all of the ideas out of his proclamation to the people of South Carolina when he tried to tell the South that they could not secede. This is the man who articulated that. One of the last levies he had was the so-called cheese levy. There was a man in New York who had a huge cheddar cheese made just for Andrew Jackson. It took 150 cows working 5 days solid to provide the curd that went into this 4-foot in diameter cheese, 2 feet thick, and 24 horses, 1,500 pounds of it, to the White House, with a band around it that said, "Our union must be preserved." And for 2 years, it was cured out there in the hallway. They said you could smell it for miles around. And then on Washington's birthday, February the 22nd, he invited all the people of Washington to come and sample the cheese. They went through it in 2 hours. They said everybody was there to eat it, even diplomats and congressmen. All you heard was cheese. All you smelled was cheese. The carpets were slippery with cheese. The pockets were filled with the stuff. The very air for half a mile around was permeated with the aroma of cheese. Mobs thought it was one of the greatest levees in Washington's history. He went home. Everybody thought he was dying. After that one last hemorrhage, they thought he was going to be the first president to die in office. And miraculously, he recovered. And they said it was a miracle. And one of his servants said, no, he just decided he wasn't going. And he lived 9 years long after he left the presidency. And when he died, he turned to his servants and he said, I hope I meet you all in heaven, black and white, and expired. And one man turned to one of the servants and said, do you think General Jackson has gone to heaven? And the servant thought a minute and said, if General Jackson wants to go to heaven, who's going to stop him? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
You all to come out in the hall and pay your respects and say thank you for this exceptional and wonderfully moving program. Thank you. We'll never forget it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you all.